In September of 2019, a backcountry ranger named Daniel Reeves received a warning before entering Yellowstone's Thorofare corridor. The warning did not come from his supervisor. It did not come from a safety briefing or a risk assessment form. It came from a 74-year-old Crow elder named Harold Whitehorse, who had served as a wilderness consultant for the National Park Service for over 2 decades. Whitehorse pulled Reeves aside in the parking lot of the Yellowstone Heritage and Research Center in Gardner, Montana. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture dramatically. He stood still, looked at Reeves directly, and said, "What is in that corridor is not an animal. Do not treat it like one." Reeves thanked him. He thought he understood what that meant. He did not understand what that meant. What happened over the following 4 days in one of the most remote stretches of wilderness in the continental United States is documented across 3 sources: Reeves' handwritten field notes, a recorded debrief conducted by a Yellowstone supervisory ranger on September 29, 2019, and a follow-up conversation between Reeves and Harold Whitehorse that Reeves transcribed by hand the same evening it occurred. The field report Reeves submitted through official NPS channels was reclassified internally 11 days after filing. The reason given was administrative. No further explanation was provided to Reeves, and none has been provided since. This account is drawn from those documents, from Crow oral record as described by Whitehorse across separate interviews, and from the geographical and behavioral data Reeves collected during his 4 days in the Thorofare. The goal here is not interpretation. The goal is accurate sequence: what happened, in the order it happened, and what the physical evidence indicates about what caused it. The word Whitehorse used, the word that wasn't animal, matters. We will return to it.
But first, you need to understand who Harold Whitehorse is, what his relationship to this land represents, and why the 11-minute briefing he gave a federal ranger in a parking lot is one of the most significant pieces of testimony in this entire account. Because everything Reeves experienced in those 4 days, Whitehorse had already told him to expect. Harold Whitehorse was born in 1945 on the Crow Reservation in southern Montana, approximately 60 miles northeast of the Yellowstone boundary. He completed a degree in environmental science from Montana State University in 1971, and spent the following decade working as a wildlife tracker and cultural liaison for several federal land management agencies, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, and beginning in 1983, the National Park Service. His NPS affiliation lasted 34 years. During that time, he trained over 60 field rangers in Indigenous ecological knowledge, contributed to 3 formal wilderness assessment projects inside Yellowstone, and co-authored 2 internal reports on pre-settlement land use patterns in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. He was not a storyteller. He was a consultant. There is a difference, and it matters here. Storytellers shape what they know into something compelling. Consultants report what they observe into something useful. Whitehorse had spent 34 years operating in the second category, and the NPS had paid him accordingly. His assessments appeared in federal land management documents. His signatures appeared on reports that informed trail placement, wildlife corridor protection boundaries, and seasonal access restrictions. He was a professional in the most functional sense of that word, someone whose knowledge had been tested against real conditions and found accurate enough to rely upon. That professional credibility is the reason his warning in the Gardner parking lot carries weight that a casual encounter would not. He was not speculating, he was briefing.
And he had been waiting for years for someone going into that specific corridor to give him the 11 minutes he needed. 2 of his 3 Yellowstone projects involved the Thorofare and 2 Ocean Plateau regions specifically. He was brought onto those projects because the Crow Nation maintained oral records pertaining to that landscape that predated the park's 1872 establishment by what tribal historians estimated at several generations. These were not ceremonial records in the spiritual sense. They were functional records, the kind that tell you where the water is reliable in August, which game trails collapse in wet years, which slopes produce rockfall after the first hard freeze. And they described with the same practical specificity behavioral zones that tribal hunters were instructed to navigate under specific protocols. The National Park Service does not officially classify any of Whitehorse's cultural contributions as evidence of anomalous wildlife. The internal designation for his consultation work was Indigenous Ecological Knowledge, a formal category that groups oral environmental data with land use history, medicinal plant records, and migration patterns. This classification tells you something important about how the agency processed what Whitehorse communicated. It filed it in the same drawer as berry harvesting cycles and stream salinity records. The practical effect of that classification was that his most specific warnings never surfaced in any ranger briefing document. They were preserved in the system as cultural context, not operational intelligence. When Reeves was assigned to a solo assessment patrol of the Thorofare corridor in September 2019, the standard protocol required a cultural briefing with any Indigenous liaison who held active NPS affiliation in the relevant zone. Whitehorse was the only such liaison for the Thorofare. The briefing was scheduled for 30 minutes. Whitehorse concluded it in 11.
He said 4 things specifically. He said the corridor between the southeast arm of Yellowstone Lake and the southern Thorofare Trail junction had been flagged in Crow oral record since at least the mid-1800s. He said the flagging was not about danger in the conventional sense. It was not the way you flag a bear corridor or an unstable slope. He said what lived in that area had been observed making decisions, not reactions, decisions, and that this distinction was the reason the Crow had not hunted that zone for generations. And then he said what he said about animals. Reeves wrote it down verbatim in his field notebook. The entry reads, H.W. states, not an animal. Said it twice. Said, don't make the mistake of applying animal logic to its behavior. Said animal logic will get you killed. The word Whitehorse used instead of animal was a Crow term that Reeves could not phonetically reproduce with confidence in his notes. He described it in his recorded debrief as having 2 syllables, and said it sounded, to his ear, closer to a title than a name, as though the Crow language had created a specific grammatical slot for something that did not fit the existing categories. The Thorofare corridor is the most remote point in the contiguous United States by overland distance from the nearest road. The closest trailhead is approximately 35 miles from the region's deepest access point. There are no paved roads, no emergency vehicle access, and no communication infrastructure beyond what a ranger carries in. Resupply by horseback takes 2 full days from the nearest staging area near Yellowstone's south entrance. NPS patrol of the region operates on a rotation schedule that, during shoulder season, which September qualifies as, drops to single ranger sweeps conducted every 12 to 18 days. The window between patrols is long enough that significant events can occur in that landscape and remain undetected for weeks. Reeves's patrol was a standard 4-day sweep.
His objectives: trail condition assessment, wildlife sign documentation, and a structural inspection of the historic Thorofare patrol cabin located approximately 32 miles from the trailhead. He was equipped with standard backcountry ranger gear, shelter, 10 days of food supply, a satellite communicator set to daily check-in protocol, a .44 Magnum sidearm, and bear spray. He was traveling with one pack horse, a 12-year-old sorrel named Kepler that had completed the Thorofare route 4 times previously and had never, in Reeves's words, given me a problem on this trail. He entered the trailhead on September 22nd at 0640. Weather was clear. Elevation temperature was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The first 12 miles of his field notes are textbook routine. Blowdown documentation at mile 7, erosion notation at mile 11, standard ungulate sign near the creek crossings. The entry at mile 16, written at 1340, is the first anomaly. It reads, no bird activity since approximately mile 14, no wind to explain it. Kepler hesitant at Mountain Creek crossing, would not approach water, took 11 minutes to cross. This horse has never refused water at a crossing it knows. Reeves had 16 miles remaining to reach the patrol cabin. By the end of day 1, he had documented 3 additional behavioral anomalies. No ungulate tracks on a heavily trafficked game trail that should have showed fresh sign given the overnight temperature drop, no raptor activity over an open meadow that should have been actively hunted at that hour of the afternoon, and a total absence of squirrel and small mammal disturbance in a stand of whitebark pine. Reeves described that stand as the kind of timber that's always loud. He wrote a separate note about the silence, not the quiet of wind down at dusk, the complete absence of the baseline sound a living forest produces even when nothing visible is moving. He wrote, not quiet, silent.
There is a difference, and every person who has spent real time in backcountry knows that difference immediately. Day 2 delivered more of the same, with escalation. Kepler began stopping without any cue from Reeves at irregular intervals, ears hard forward, nostrils active, weight shifted onto his hindquarters in the specific posture Reeves associated with a horse that has already decided it might need to bolt but hasn't yet committed to the decision. Each stop, Reeves halted, scanned the surrounding terrain in full, found nothing visible. The stops averaged between 40 seconds and 4 minutes in duration. There were 9 of them across a 6-hour travel day. A horse that has traveled a route before develops behavioral shortcuts. Kepler knew this trail. He had moved through it 4 times without incident. A trained pack horse on familiar ground does not stop 9 times in a single travel day for unknown stimuli, not unless whatever is producing those stimuli has been consistently present since the morning. The stimulus has to be sustained and directionally specific to produce that quality of sustained attention. It cannot be wind-borne scent, which dissipates and shifts. It cannot be random sound, which would produce reactive swiveling rather than locked forward attention. Whatever Kepler was tracking was moving with them, at a pace close enough to register continuously, far enough to stay beyond Reeves's visual range. Reeves wrote, "I have worked this horse for 6 years. He has never stopped 9 times in a single day on a route he has traveled before. He is not reacting to anything I can see, hear, or smell. He is reacting to something sustained, something that has been with us or ahead of us for most of today's miles." He reached camp at the Two Ocean Plateau Junction at 17:15, still 6 miles short of the patrol cabin, and chose not to push the remaining distance in diminishing light. He made no fire that evening.
In his debrief, he described this as an instinctive decision, not a planned one, not one he consciously connected at the time to anything Whitehorse had said. He simply did not want one. He ate a cold meal and wrote field notes until 2100, then lay in his tent listening to Kepler shift his weight in the darkness outside. Day 3 began before dawn. Reeves broke camp at 05:30 and reached the Thorofare patrol cabin at approximately 10:20 after 6 miles of trail that Kepler walked with his ears in constant motion. The cabin inspection was Reeves' first task. During the exterior portion of that inspection, on the north-facing wall along the cabin's foundation drainage line, he found the first physical evidence. The prints were in a narrow strip of mud that had retained moisture from a recent rain. They were bipedal, meaning whatever left them had been walking on 2 feet, consistently, with a stride pattern too regular and too long to accommodate any known quadruped moving momentarily on its hind legs. Reeves measured the clearest impression, 16.5 inches in length, 7 inches at the widest point across the metatarsal region. The depth relative to surrounding undisturbed mud suggested a body weight he estimated between 600 and 800 pounds, based on his formal training in wildlife track assessment. He photographed all 7 visible impressions with scale markers. He noted direction of travel, southeast, moving away from the cabin toward the drainage corridor descending toward the Yellowstone River. He followed that direction 340 meters and found the elk. In a small clearing at the edge of a mature spruce stand, on a natural shelf of rock elevated approximately 4 feet above the surrounding ground surface, was the carcass of a cow elk. She had been dead between 48 and 72 hours, based on carcass condition, ambient temperature, and insect succession.
The hindquarters had been partially consumed, not in the ragged pattern of bear or wolf, but with controlled removal of specific muscle groups. The remainder of the carcass was intact. The head was oriented north. The carcass had not been dragged to the shelf. No drag marks approached from any direction on the ground below. The soil around the shelf space showed compression consistent with a large bipedal subject standing at the shelf edge and lowering the carcass into position from above. The shelf itself was 4 feet off the ground. The elk weighed, Reeves estimated, between 450 and 500 pounds. Bears cache food, wolves cache food, mountain lions store food in elevated positions. None of them lift a 500-pound elk 4 feet onto a rock shelf. None of them orient the head. Reeves measured, photographed, collected soil samples from the compression points, and documented the consumed sections with written anatomical precision. Then, on the south side of the clearing, he found the second set of prints, 13 inches, same bipedal stride, same depth signature indicating substantial mass. He wrote, 2 subjects, larger placed the carcass, smaller stood at the south perimeter and did not approach the elk at any point. The smaller print track shows no forward movement toward the carcass, observer, or participant of a different kind. He returned to the cabin at 1340. He did not eat. He sat on the front step for 23 minutes without writing. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, "Not an animal." That evening, seated inside with the door latched and the lantern lit, Reeves spent nearly 2 hours reconstructing Whitehorse's briefing from memory. What he produced forms the most complete written account of what Whitehorse communicated on September 22nd. He expanded it further in his recorded debrief 5 days later. Whitehorse had told him that crow hunters first began formally avoiding specific sections of the Thorofare drainage in the mid to late 1800s.
Not the entire corridor, targeted zones, the southeast arm drainage, the river confluence area, the high bench terrain directly east of the patrol cabin's current location. These zones were not avoided because of predator concentration or a seasonal hazard. They were avoided because of encounters across multiple generations in which the entity inhabiting those zones displayed behavior that fell entirely outside every behavioral category the crow applied to other living things. The entity had demonstrated recognition. Not just awareness of humans, recognition of specific individuals across separate encounters. Hunters who entered the zone once and returned found themselves treated differently on the second visit than on the first. The oral record was explicit on this point. It remembered who it had seen, and it applied that memory to how it subsequently behaved toward them. This was not territorial response, which is consistent and non-discriminating. This was individual. This was selective. It had also been documented leaving objects near crow campsites, not food, not territory markers, objects, stones arranged in configurations with no natural explanation, a stripped sapling planted upright in soft ground beside a tent, patterns of marks on trees at heights and intervals that the elders who examined them determined could not be produced by any bear species present in the region. The behavioral pattern around these objects, observed from distance across multiple accounts, suggested not instinct, but intent. The elders who first recorded these encounters settled on a classification for the behavior. Whitehorse gave Reeves the crow term's translation. It was the word they used for deliberate communication between known parties, not between strangers, between individuals who had already established contact. The 4 protocols Whitehorse had described were each derived from that accumulated observation.
No wood knock response after dark, interpreted as a territorial challenge and historically preceding aggressive approach. No sustained fire after a third knock sequence. Fire in that corridor functions as a territorial marker and has consistently provoked a response when maintained. No solo approach to water after 3 evenly spaced vocalizations in sequence. That specific pattern had been documented in the oral record as a behavioral precursor in encounters that turn dangerous. And no overt documentation of the entity if it presents in the open. Direct photographic or recording behavior had preceded the most severe historical encounters without exception. Reeves wrote the 4 rules cleanly on a fresh page. Then he added 1 line. The elk carcass was positioned where I would find it during a standard inspection sequence. Something understood my likely movements. The placement was prepared. He put the notebook down at 2040. At 0114 exactly, 3 knocks woke him. Wood on wood, even. 8 seconds between each. Originating from the north tree line at an estimated distance of 180 to 220 meters. He did not knock back. He killed the lantern. What followed occupied the next 4 hours and is recorded in 22 consecutive notebook entries written by headlamp while Reeves sat with his back pressed to the interior south wall. The handwriting degrades across the sequence, measurably smaller by entry 14, several words unfinished by entry 19. The content throughout remains precise. At 0131, the exterior north wall received a single impact, flat-palmed, deliberate, not repeated. Reeves wrote, not a strike, not scratching, contact. It is testing the wall's integrity or announcing presence. Both are possible. Both are disturbing. At 0148, Kepler vocalized from the adjacent paddock, a low, sustained groan that Reeves had not heard from the horse in 6 years together. Not a fear whinny, not the short burst of alarm.
A controlled, extended sound he described as what a horse sounds like when it has accepted that something is happening and has decided to wait rather than run. He wrote, Kepler knows exactly where it is. Between 048 and 020, no sound, no movement from outside, no further noise from Kepler. Reeves sat and watched both windows, north and east, both fitted with latched interior wooden shutters, both latched before dark. He noticed during the silence that the east shutter had shifted. A gap of approximately 1 inch had opened along its right edge. He had not opened it. He wrote, I did not touch that shutter after latching it. The gap was not there when I closed it. At 020, through that 1-inch gap, in the ambient moonlight falling across the cabin's east clearing, Reeves saw it.
He wrote like a field observer, because that was what he was. Upright, stationary, approximately 8 feet in height, assessed against the paddock fence post I know is 5'6" at the crossbar. Shoulder width estimated at 3 feet minimum. Not moving, facing the cabin, not facing the window, facing the door. He added, "It knows which side of the cabin I am on. It is looking where I am, not where the light was." Neither of them moved for 19 minutes, Reeves counted. At 0:21, the figure stepped once to its left, one deliberate step. Then it stopped. Then its head turned toward the east window, toward the 1-inch gap specifically, and held there. Reeves wrote 4 words, "It sees me here." Then, it looked directly through 1 inch of space in a dark room at 0:21. Then it walked into the tree line. Not running, not retreating, walking. At 03:12, a second knock sequence. 3 knocks, 8 seconds apart, from the south side this time. The figure had moved completely around the cabin while Reeves watched the eastern tree line. He wrote, "It wanted me to know it had repositioned. If concealment had been the objective, I would not have heard those knocks."
He did not sleep again that night. At 04:48, he made his decision. He loaded Kepler in total darkness, using no headlamp, working by touch through equipment he had packed hundreds of times. He did not speak to the horse. He wrote later, "I think I didn't want to hear my own voice." He left the cabin at 05:21 into flat gray pre-dawn light and set a heading directly north, 32 miles to the trailhead. He kept a pace faster than standard, but not hurried. Hurry produces noise and degraded decision-making. He kept Kepler at a controlled walk and watched both sides of the trail. At mile 3, in a section where mature spruce closed over the trail on both sides, Kepler stopped, ears locked left, weight back. Reeves halted and scanned the left side timber. Nothing visible in the low light. He waited 90 seconds. He wrote, "It is there, left side, between 50 and 80 meters into the timber, based on Kepler's ear angle and the specific quality of his attention. Kepler is not uncertain. He is tracking something with precision." He did not call out. He did not raise the bear spray. He did not shine a light into the timber. He applied the first protocol, no direct acknowledgement. He kept walking. For the next 2.1 miles, Kepler's ears remained fixed left at a constant bearing, not swiveling forward to check the trail ahead, not scanning behind. Fixed left, which meant whatever moved in the timber was maintaining a constant parallel distance to within a few meters across the entire stretch. Reeves wrote 3 entries in that segment. They read, "Still there," then, "Still there," same distance throughout, then, "It is not following me, it is walking beside me. These are not the same thing." At mile 5.2, the trail broke from closed timber into a wide open meadow. Kepler's ears went neutral. Reeves stopped and stood in the meadow for 4 minutes, watching the timber edge. No movement, no sound, nothing further. He wrote, "It stopped at the boundary between timber and open ground."
It did not follow into the meadow. His camera was in his chest pocket. He did not take it out. He stood in the open for 4 minutes looking at the tree line, then turned north and kept walking. He reached the trailhead at 18:47. He sat in his truck for 22 minutes before starting the engine. His final field entry, written in the parking lot, "I followed all 4 rules. I believe those 4 decisions are the reason I am sitting here writing this. I do not have another conclusion available." Reeves filed his incident report on September 26th, complete field notes, full photo documentation, soil sample chain of custody, and a detailed written account of the cabin encounter in the parallel trail movement. He filed it under Unusual Wildlife Sign and Behavioral Anomaly. On October 7th, 11 days after submission, he received internal notification that the report had been reclassified. The specific category was not disclosed to him. His request for clarification was routed to his supervisor, who told him it was a procedural matter and nothing further was required. The reclassification is worth pausing on. NPS internal reporting systems have clear categories for wildlife incidents: predator encounters, unusual animal behavior, carcass documentation, track evidence. When a report cannot be placed in those categories, it is typically returned to the ranger for additional clarification before filing is finalized. That process takes days, not 11 days, and it involves communication. Reeves received no questions, no requests for additional documentation, no follow-up from the Wildlife Division. The report was simply moved. That kind of unilateral, silent reclassification is unusual in a bureaucratic system designed around paper trails and procedural transparency. It suggests someone who in the report recognized what it described and made a deliberate decision about where it should live. On October 9th, a regional NPS supervisor called Reeves directly.
The call ran 4 minutes. The supervisor asked one question. Had Reeves shared the report content with anyone outside NPS? Reeves said no. The supervisor said, "Good, keep it that way for now." The call ended. No follow-up came. No second patrol of the Thorofare cabin was conducted in the remainder of the 2019 field season. That same evening, Reeves called Harold Whitehorse. He read him the key entries from his field notes: the elk placement, the cabin contact, the parallel movement, the figure at 0220, the decision at the timber edge. Whitehorse listened without interrupting. When Reeves finished, there was a pause. Whitehorse said, "Now you understand the word I used." Reeves asked for the translation of the Crow term. Whitehorse provided it. Reeves's transcription of the conversation contains this line. "He told me the translation. I am not going to write it down here. He said it is better not to write it outside of proper context. I am going to respect that." Whatever the word means, it does not appear in any document Reeves produced. Not his field notes, not his debrief recording, not his incident report. The word is somewhere in Whitehorse's knowledge and in Reeves's memory, and in neither of those places is it accessible here. Crow oral tradition holds that what inhabits the Thorofare drainage has been present in that landscape longer than any living elder can personally account for. The oral record does not begin with a first encounter. It begins mid-history, as though the entity's presence was already established and categorized before the records themselves were initiated. The absence of an origin story is significant. Among the most carefully preserved elements of oral tradition are precisely those accounts of first contact. Their absence here is not an oversight. It suggests either that no one in recorded Crow memory was present at the beginning, or that the beginning predates anything that could be called memory. It has a name in that tradition.
The name is specific. It belongs to a category of beings that the Crow do not classify alongside animals, alongside spirits, or alongside human beings. It occupies its own category, one that was built specifically for it and for nothing else. Maintained across generations not as mythology, but as taxonomy. Harold Whitehorse, in a separate interview conducted after all of the events described in this account, offered one additional statement that appears in no official NPS documentation. He said, "The Crow did not avoid that corridor out of fear. Fear means you don't understand something. They avoided it because they understood what it had established there and what respect for that establishment required. Avoidance was not weakness. It was accuracy." He was asked whether he considered it dangerous. He said, "It is dangerous the same way a clearly marked boundary is dangerous. Cross it wrong, and yes, something happens. But that boundary was there long before the park was designated, long before any federal survey mapped that land. It established its own boundaries and has maintained them since before anyone thought to draw lines on a map." He was asked whether Reeves had crossed the boundary. Whitehorse said Reeves had come close to it. And then he said something specific. The entity had made a choice, not a reaction, a choice, to allow Reeves to leave. The Crow record made clear that it was always capable of preventing departure when it elected not to permit it. In the historical encounters that ended with casualties, it had elected differently. With Reeves, for reasons the record does not offer a framework to explain, it decided otherwise. He said the name for it once, quietly, in Crow. He said speaking it more than once in a single conversation was among the behaviors the elders had identified as drawing its attention, across distance, across the boundary, in ways the oral record described but did not fully explain. He did not repeat it.
It has been in that corridor for a very long time. It understands the patrol rotation. It knew when that cabin was going to be occupied. It knew Reeves was coming before Reeves arrived. He stood, put on his jacket, and left the room. Through the window, he sat in his truck in the parking lot for a long time before starting the engine. No follow-up interview was conducted after that day. No one filed the recording. The Thorofare patrol cabin remains in active rotation. Rangers still cycle through it on standard schedule. The reclassified report is somewhere in the NPS system. The photographs exist. The soil samples exist. The field notes are in Reeves's possession. The name Harold Whitehorse spoke that afternoon, quietly, once, in a language built over centuries to be precise about exactly this kind of thing, also exists. He asked that it not be repeated here, so it won't be.
Some knowledge carries weight precisely because it stays in the right hands. This is one of those things.